When my wife was teaching our daughter math, she said, "Remember, honey, Daddy only deserves respect on payday." What did you just tell her? I stood in the hallway listening to my wife Rebecca helping our 8-year-old daughter Lily with homework at the kitchen table. Rebecca looked up annoyed that I'd interrupted. I'm teaching her about value and worth. Something you'd understand if you made better career choices. She turned back to Lily, who was working on multiplication tables. 7 times 0 equals 0, sweetie. Just like Daddy's contribution this week since he hasn't gotten his paycheck yet. Lily wrote down the answer and looked at me. Mommy says you're a 0 until Friday. Rebecca smiled, proud of the lesson she was teaching. That's right, baby. Men are only worth what they can provide. No money means no value. I walked into the kitchen. Rebecca, she's 8 years old. What are you teaching her? Rebecca stood up and pulled out a chart she'd made. I'm teaching her reality. The chart had days of the week with dollar amounts and smiley faces or frowny faces. See this? When Daddy gets paid on Friday, he gets a smiley face. The rest of the week, he gets frowny faces because he's worthless. She'd been tracking my pay periods on a chart for our daughter to see. This is insane. I work 50 hours a week as a teacher. Rebecca laughed. A teacher. Exactly my point. You make $43,000 a year. That's basically poverty. She pulled Lily closer. That's why Mommy has to sell jewelry online to afford nice things. Her jewelry business that had lost money for 3 years straight. You've made $12 this month, Rebecca. She waved her hand, dismissive. It's about potential. My business has growth opportunity. Your salary is capped forever. She looked at Lily. That's why we don't listen to Daddy about money. He doesn't understand ambition. Lily raised her hand like she was in school. Mommy, why does Daddy sleep in the garage? Rebecca had moved my things to the garage 2 months ago. Because sweetie men who don't provide properly don't deserve bedroom privileges. She said it matter-of-fact like it was normal. Once Daddy gets a better job, he can sleep inside again. I'd been sleeping on a cot in the garage in February because my teaching salary wasn't enough. Rebecca, this is emotional abuse, to me and to Lily. Rebecca pulled out her phone. Abuse? I'm educating our daughter about economics. She showed me something on her screen. This influencer says women should never respect men who make under 6 figures. The influencer had been divorced 4 times. You're taking advice from someone who's been married more times than she's had jobs? Rebecca got defensive. She's a businesswoman. She monetized her divorces into a brand. She turned to Lily. That's called leveraging assets, baby. Our 8-year-old nodded like she understood. Is Daddy an asset or a liability? Rebecca clapped, excited. Such a smart question. What do you think? Lily looked at me, then at the chart. Liability because he costs more than he makes? My own daughter calling me a liability. Rebecca hugged her. Exactly right. Daddy's take-home is $2,600 a month, but he costs us at least $3,000 in food and space. She pulled out a calculator. Show Mommy how much Daddy loses us each month. Lily started subtracting on the calculator. $400 negative. Rebecca gave her a candy from the reward jar. Perfect. That's why we're considering replacing Daddy with someone more profitable. Replacing me? What are you talking about? Rebecca showed Lily another chart. Mommy made a list of better options. Look, there's Mr. Henderson from down the street. He owns a construction company. She pointed at his income estimate. $200,000 a year. That would buy so many toys. Lily's eyes got big. Could we get a pool? Rebecca nodded. With a better Daddy, we could get anything. That's when I noticed Lily's piggy bank was empty. Where's her birthday money? Rebecca didn't even look guilty. I invested it in my business. Inventory doesn't buy itself. She'd taken our daughter's $150 from her grandparents. Besides, that money came from your parents, so it's technically marital funds. Everything was marital funds to Rebecca, except her losses, which were business investments. You stole from our daughter? Rebecca stood up angry. Stole? I redirected underutilized resources. She looked at Lily. Tell Daddy what we learned about money sitting idle. Lily recited like she'd memorized it. Money that sits doesn't grow. Only stupid people save instead of spend. Rebecca beamed. My smart girl. Unlike Daddy, who wastes money on his retirement account. She'd tried to cash out my 401k last month. That's protected funds, Rebecca. For our future. She laughed harsh. What future? You think I'm retiring with someone who makes teacher money? She pulled out divorce papers from the kitchen drawer. I already filled these out, just waiting for the right timing. Lily started crying. Are you leaving Daddy? Rebecca hugged her. Only if he doesn't improve his income, sweetie. It's motivation. She looked at me. You have 6 months to double your salary or we're upgrading. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway watching my 8-year-old daughter calculate my worth on a chart like I was some kind of stock portfolio. Rebecca had her arm around Lily, showing her the smiley faces and frowny faces that tracked my value as a human being based on when my paycheck cleared. The chart was laminated. She'd actually taken the time to laminate it and hang it on the refrigerator where Lily would see it every single day. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't move. I couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't a bad moment or a fight that got out of hand. This was a system. Rebecca had built an entire framework to teach our daughter that I was worthless 6 days a week and barely acceptable on payday. She had charts for replacement dads. She had taken Lily's birthday money. She had divorce papers ready in the kitchen drawer like a loaded gun. I looked at Lily's face and saw confusion mixed with something worse, which was acceptance. She was starting to believe this. My own daughter was learning to see me as a zero. That night, I lay on the cot in the garage staring at the ceiling, while cold air seeped through the gaps around the door. I'd been sleeping out here for 2 months because my teaching salary wasn't good enough for bedroom privileges. The concrete floor made everything colder, and I could see my breath in the dim light from the street lamp outside. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that chart on the refrigerator with the frowny faces next to my name. I got up and found an old notebook in one of the boxes of my stuff that Rebecca had dumped out here. I started writing down everything that had happened over the past 2 months. The bedroom exile came first, then taking Lily's birthday money and calling it redirected resources. The replacement daddy chart with Mr. Henderson at the top. Calling me a zero in front of Lily. The divorce papers in the drawer. Teaching Lily that people are liabilities if they cost more than they make. Making her do math problems about how much money I lose the family each month. The list kept growing. I filled 3 pages and my hand was cramping, but I couldn't stop. Seeing it all written out in one place made something shift in my chest. This wasn't normal marriage problems. This wasn't even a bad patch. This was abuse. The word felt too big in my head, but looking at 3 pages of documentation, I couldn't call it anything else. Rebecca was abusing me, and she was abusing Lily by teaching her these toxic ideas about worth and value. I folded the pages and put them in my wallet. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I knew I couldn't pretend this was normal anymore. The next morning at the school, I went through my classes on autopilot. My first period American history students were taking a quiz, and I sat at my desk staring at the wall clock. Theo Beckham caught me in the hallway during passing period between 3rd and 4th. He taught English 2 doors down, and we'd been friends since I started working here 4 years ago. He took one look at my face and pulled me into his empty classroom. He asked if everything was okay at home. I tried to deflect and said I was just tired. He didn't buy it. He'd known me long enough to tell when something was seriously wrong. During lunch, he came to my classroom with sandwiches from the cafeteria and shut the door. He said I looked like hell and asked what was going on. I pulled out the folded pages from my wallet and handed them to him. He read through the list and his face went pale. He looked up at me and asked how long this had been happening. I told him 2 months for the garage, but probably longer for the other stuff. He read through it again and his hands were shaking a little. He said this was bad. Really bad. He used words like financial abuse and parental alienation. I'd never applied those terms to my own situation before. They sounded too serious, like things that happened to other people. But reading my own list through his eyes, I couldn't deny that's exactly what this was. Theo said I needed to talk to someone who could actually help. He mentioned Caitlin Palermo, the school counselor who handled family crisis situations. I was reluctant to involve more people. Every person who knew made this more real and harder to take back. But Theo offered to come with me for support, and I realized I couldn't figure this out alone. We went to Caitlin's office after school. She was in her late 30s with kind eyes, and she listened to everything without judgment. I showed her the list and she read it carefully. She asked questions about Lily and how she was acting at home. I told her about the math lessons and the charts and how Lily was starting to absorb these ideas about value being tied to money. Caitlin's expression got more serious as I talked. She explained that what Rebecca was doing to Lily constituted psychological abuse. Teaching a child that a parent has no value is deeply harmful to development. Kids need to see both parents as worthy of love and respect, regardless of income. When you teach them that people are disposable based on bank accounts, you damage their ability to form healthy relationships. She said I needed to consult a family law attorney immediately to understand my options and protect Lily. She gave me names of attorneys who did free consultations. I took the paper and folded it into my wallet with my list. I felt sick. That evening, I went home and tried to act normal. Rebecca was making dinner and Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table. I asked Lily about her day at the school, and she told me about a spelling test. Rebecca noticed I was quieter than usual. She made a comment about how my silence proved I knew she was right about my inadequacy. She said strong men don't sulk when confronted with facts about their failures. Lily looked up from her worksheet and watched us. She had her pencil in her hand writing numbers on problems about multiplication. Rebecca kept talking while she stirred something on the stove. She said my lack of defense showed I had no argument against her points. If I really believed I was providing adequately, I would fight back. But instead, I just stood there like someone who knew they were beaten. Lily absorbed every word while writing 7 times 8 equals 56. Her mother was tearing down her father while she did math homework, and she just kept writing numbers like this was normal. I wanted to say something, but my throat felt tight. Anything I said would start a fight in front of Lily, and that would make things worse. So I stood there quiet, while Rebecca proved her own point about my weakness. I waited until Rebecca took Lily to dance class on Wednesday evening. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I went to my laptop in the garage and started searching for family law attorneys. I filtered for ones who offered free consultations, because I couldn't afford to pay for advice I might not use. I found Raymond McGrath, whose website specifically mentioned parental alienation cases. His bio said he'd been practicing family law for 15 years and had handled complex custody situations. I filled out the contact form and got an automated response saying someone would call me within 24 hours. The next morning, his office called while I was between classes. I scheduled a consultation for Saturday morning at 9. Rebecca thought I had weekend tutoring at the school on Saturdays, so she wouldn't question where I was going. I told the receptionist I'd be there and hung up. My hands were sweating. This felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Once I talked to a lawyer about custody and divorce, this became real in a way it wasn't before. Saturday morning, I drove to Raymond McGrath's office in a building downtown. The waiting room had leather chairs and magazines about parenting. A receptionist checked me in, and I sat there for 10 minutes trying not to throw up. Raymond came out and shook my hand. He was in his 50s with gray hair and a firm handshake. His office had law books on shelves and family photos on his desk. He asked me to tell him what was going on. I pulled out my list and the photos I'd taken of Rebecca's charts on my phone. He looked through everything carefully. He'd seen cases like this before. He explained that family courts take parental alienation seriously, but custody battles are long and emotionally draining. He asked if I'd considered that Rebecca might escalate if she realized I was planning to leave. I hadn't thought about that. He said women who need financial control often react badly when they sense they're losing it. He asked about our joint bank account and whether Rebecca had access to my paycheck. I told him everything went into the joint account and she monitored every transaction. He nodded like he expected that answer. Raymond advised me to open a separate bank account immediately and redirect my paycheck before Rebecca tried to drain the joint account. He said I should start recording conversations with Rebecca's permission since we live in a 2-party consent state. If she wouldn't consent, then I needed to keep detailed written records of everything she said with dates and times. He explained that documentation would be crucial in custody proceedings. Judges need evidence, not just stories. The consultation itself cost nothing, but his retainer for representation would be $3,500. I didn't have that much readily available. My savings account had $800 that I'd been keeping for emergencies. He said he gave me his card. I thanked him and left feeling overwhelmed. $3,500 might as well have been $35,000 on my salary. But I also knew I couldn't keep living like this, and I couldn't let Rebecca keep damaging Lily. I drove across town to a bank I'd never used before. I didn't want to risk running into anyone who might mention it to Rebecca. I opened a new checking account with the $800 cash I'd pulled from savings earlier. The woman helping me was friendly and efficient. She set up the account and gave me temporary checks and a debit card. On Monday, I would need to go to the school's HR office and redirect my direct deposit to this new account instead of the joint one. My hands shook while I signed the paperwork. This was the point of no return. Once my paycheck stopped going into the joint account, Rebecca would know something was wrong. She'd confront me and I'd have to either lie or tell her the truth. Either way, everything would explode. I finished the paperwork and walked out to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes just breathing. My whole life was about to change and I couldn't stop it. But when I thought about Lily learning that people are zeros and liabilities, I knew I had to do this. I started the car and drove back across town. I had one more day before I had to redirect my paycheck. One more day before everything fell apart. Monday morning, I walked into the school's HR office with the new account information folded in my pocket. The woman behind the desk looked up from her computer and smiled. Her name was Sandra, and she'd processed my paperwork when I first got hired 6 years ago. I pulled out the direct deposit form and slid it across the desk. She glanced at it and her smile faded a little. She typed something into her computer and then looked at me more carefully. I must have looked terrible because I hadn't slept much over the weekend. She asked if everything was okay, and I hesitated before answering. I told her I was going through some family stuff and needed to make this change. She nodded slowly and printed out a confirmation form for me to sign. While I signed it, she mentioned that the school district had an employee assistance program that offered free counseling sessions. She pulled out a brochure from her desk drawer and pushed it toward me. I took it even though I wasn't sure I'd use it. The idea of talking to a stranger about my marriage falling apart felt overwhelming. She processed the change and told me it would take effect with my next paycheck on Friday. I thanked her and left the office with the brochure crumpled in my hand. That Friday, I taught my last class of the day and drove home with my stomach in knots. My paycheck had gone into the new account that morning, and Rebecca would have checked the joint account by now. She always checked on Fridays. I pulled into the driveway and saw her car was already there. I sat in my car for a minute trying to prepare myself for what was coming. I walked up to the front door and opened it. Rebecca was standing in the entryway waiting for me. Her face was red and her hands were shaking. She demanded to know where my paycheck went. I set my bag down and tried to stay calm. She started yelling that she'd checked the account 3 times and the money wasn't there. Lily appeared in the hallway behind her with wide, scared eyes. Rebecca accused me of hiding assets and trying to leave her with nothing. I told her I opened my own account and that she didn't have a right to my entire paycheck. She stepped closer to me and her voice got louder. She said everything I earned belonged to the family, which meant it belonged to her to manage. I could smell her perfume mixed with anger. She threatened to lock me out of the house entirely, not just the bedroom. Lily started crying in the hallway and I wanted to go to her, but Rebecca blocked my path. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and pressed record without looking at it. I kept it in my hand at my side while Rebecca continued yelling. She said I was stealing from my own daughter and that she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I was. I told her calmly that the money was mine and I had every right to control my own income. She laughed harsh and bitter. She said we'd see what a judge thought about that. Lily ran to her room and slammed the door. Rebecca's face turned even redder and she started yelling louder than before. She said everything I earned belonged to the family, and that meant she got to decide how it was spent. I stood there with my phone still recording in my hand. She moved closer until she was inches from my face. She said if I thought I could just hide money from her, I was stupider than she thought. I could feel her breath on my face and I took a step back. She followed me. She threatened to lock me out of the house completely and said I could sleep in my car for all she cared. I told her she couldn't do that because my name was on the mortgage. She laughed and said she'd find a way. She said I was nothing without her and that I'd never make it on my own with my pathetic teacher salary. I kept the phone recording even though I knew it wouldn't be admissible in court because she hadn't consented. But I wanted documentation for myself of how she responded to losing financial control. She grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. She said I had 24 hours to put my paycheck back in the joint account or she'd make my life hell. I pulled my arm away and told her I wasn't doing that. She screamed that I was a selfish bastard who didn't care about his own daughter. Lily's door opened and she peeked out crying. Rebecca turned and told her to go back to her room. Lily disappeared again. I walked past Rebecca to the garage and locked the door behind me. The next day, I went to work like normal. I taught my classes and graded papers and tried not to think about what Rebecca might be doing at home. When the final bell rang, I packed up my things and headed to my car. I drove home with the radio off because I couldn't focus on music. I turned onto our street and saw something wrong immediately. There were black trash bags all over the driveway. I pulled up and parked on the street. I got out and walked closer. The bags were full of my clothes and belongings. I tried the front door and my key didn't work. She'd changed the locks. I looked up at the living room window and saw Lily crying with her hands pressed against the glass. Rebecca stood behind her with her arms crossed, looking satisfied with herself. I pulled out my phone and called the police non-emergency line. The dispatcher asked what was happening, and I explained that my wife had locked me out of my own house and put my belongings on the driveway. She asked if anyone was in danger, and I said no, but that I needed help getting back into my home. She said she'd send 2 officers. I waited on the driveway next to the trash bags. Some of my clothes had spilled out onto the concrete. I picked up a shirt and folded it slowly. Lily was still at the window crying. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but I couldn't get to her. 2 police cars pulled up about 15 minutes later. 2 officers got out and walked over to me. I explained the situation and showed them my driver's license with this address on it. One of them was older with gray hair, and the other was younger, maybe in his 20s. The older officer asked if my name was on the mortgage, and I said yes. He walked up to the front door and knocked. Rebecca opened it, looking sweet and innocent. She smiled at the officers and asked how she could help them. The older officer explained that I'd called because I couldn't get into my home. Rebecca's face changed to concerned and apologetic. She said there must have been a misunderstanding. She said she'd changed the locks because she thought I'd lost my keys. The officer asked her to provide me with a new key immediately. She went inside and came back with a key. She handed it to me and told the officers she was sorry for the confusion. The older officer explained to Rebecca that since my name was on the mortgage and lease, she could not legally lock me out of my own home. He said what she'd done constituted an illegal eviction. She nodded and said she understood. The officers asked if there were any other issues, and I said no. They got back in their cars and drove away. The moment they turned the corner, Rebecca's face changed. She looked at Lily, who was still in the living room. She said loud enough for me to hear that Daddy had called the police on Mommy like a bad person would. Lily's face crumpled and she started crying harder. I picked up the trash bags one by one and carried them to the garage. It took 6 trips. Rebecca watched from the window the whole time. I didn't go into the house because being in there felt dangerous now. I organized my belongings in the garage and made up the cot. The sun was setting and the garage got cold fast. I sat on the cot and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found my father's number. I hadn't called him in 2 weeks because I'd been too ashamed to tell him what was happening. I pressed call and he answered on the second ring. His voice was warm and familiar. He asked how I was doing and I felt something break inside me. I told him everything. The charts and the garage and Rebecca stealing Lily's birthday money and the divorce papers in the kitchen drawer. I told him about opening the new bank account and Rebecca changing the locks. He was quiet for a long time. Then he got angry. He asked why I hadn't told him sooner. I said I didn't know how to explain it. He said I was his son and I should have come to him for help. He told me he lived 2 hours away and I could bring Lily and stay with him. He said he had $5,000 in savings that he could loan me for legal fees if I needed it. I felt tears running down my face. I thanked him and told him I'd already hired an attorney. He said the money was mine whenever I needed it. We talked for another hour about what I should do next. When we hung up, I felt less alone than I had in months. On Monday morning, I got to the school early and went straight to my classroom. I had 20 minutes before first period started. Caitlin called my classroom phone at 8:15. She asked if I could come to her office. I told her I'd be there in 5 minutes. I walked down the hallway past students getting books from their lockers. Her office was on the 2nd floor next to the principal's suite. I knocked and she opened the door. Her face was serious. She asked me to sit down. I sat in the chair across from her desk. She said Lily's teacher had reported some concerning comments Lily made in class on Friday. During a lesson about community helpers, Lily had told the class that teachers didn't deserve respect because they didn't make enough money. The teacher had gently corrected her, but Lily insisted that her mother said people were only worth their paychecks. The teacher was worried about what was happening at home. Caitlin looked at me with sympathy. She said she knew I was dealing with a difficult situation, but that Lily's comments suggested she was being psychologically harmed. I told her I was already working with an attorney to address it. She nodded but said she wanted me to know that teachers were mandatory reporters. If they believed a child was harmed, they had to file a report with Child Protective Services. That afternoon, I met with Lily's teacher and the principal in the conference room. Mrs. and Lily's teacher was a woman in her 40s named Mrs. Smith. The principal was a tall man with glasses who'd been at the school for 15 years. They both looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Smith explained again what Lily had said in class. She said other students had looked confused and upset. One child had asked if his dad, who was a firefighter, was worthless too. Mrs. Smith had spent 20 minutes trying to undo the damage. The principal said they were sympathetic to my situation, but they had legal obligations. He said if they believed Lily was being psychologically harmed, they had to file a report. I told them I understood. I explained that I'd separated my finances from Rebecca and hired a family law attorney. I said we were planning to file for custody soon. The principal leaned forward. He said I needed to act quickly before the damage to Lily became more severe. He said children internalize these messages and they become part of how they see the world. Mrs. Smith added that Lily was a sweet kid, and she hated seeing her confused and distressed. I thanked them for their concern and promised I was handling it. I left the conference room feeling sick. That evening, I tried to talk to Lily alone. She was in her room doing homework when I knocked on her door. She told me to come in. I sat on the edge of her bed and asked about her day at the school. She looked nervous. She said it was fine. I asked if anything interesting happened. She bit her lip and said her teacher had been upset about something she said. Before I could respond, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. She asked what we were talking about. I told her I was just asking about Lily's day. Rebecca walked into the room and sat next to Lily on the bed. She put her arm around Lily's shoulders. She told Lily that her teacher didn't understand how the real world worked. She said Mommy was teaching her important lessons about value and worth that school wouldn't teach. Lily nodded, but she looked confused. Rebecca said teachers had to follow rules that didn't make sense. She said the real world was about money and success and knowing your worth. I stood up and said I needed to make dinner. Rebecca smiled at me cold and sharp. She said she'd already ordered pizza. I walked out of the room. I went back to the garage and sat on the cot. I pulled out my phone and called Raymond. He answered after 3 rings. I told him about the escalation over the weekend. I described the lockout attempt and the police coming and Rebecca's reaction when they left. I told him about Lily's comments at the school and the meeting with her teacher and the principal. I explained that Rebecca was monitoring every interaction I had with Lily. Raymond was quiet while I talked. When I finished, he said we needed to file for separation and temporary custody immediately. He said Rebecca was doing more damage every day and we couldn't wait any longer. He said he'd need the $3,500 retainer to start the process. He estimated the full custody case could cost $15,000 to $20,000, depending on how hard Rebecca fought. I told him my father had offered to loan me $5,000. Raymond said that would be enough to get started. He told me to come to his office tomorrow with the check, and he'd begin preparing the paperwork. He said we'd request a custody evaluation, and the court would likely appoint someone to represent Lily's interests. He warned me the process would take months. I said I understood. I thanked him and hung up. I lay back on the cot and stared at the garage ceiling. Everything was about to change. That Saturday morning, my father pulled up in his old truck with a check already written out. He handed it to me in the driveway and said he'd cover whatever else I needed for the legal fees. I thanked him and tried not to let him see how close I was to breaking down. He wanted to go inside and talk to Rebecca himself, but I explained that confronting her would only make everything worse right now. She'd use it against me in court, claim I was turning the family against her. He looked frustrated, but he understood. Instead, we waited until Rebecca left for a jewelry vendor meeting she'd been talking about all week. Then we picked up Lily and took her to lunch at the diner she liked downtown. My father ordered her favorite pancakes with chocolate chips, and while we waited for the food, he told her how proud he was of me. He said I was a good teacher who helped kids learn and grow every single day. He said being a teacher was one of the most important jobs anyone could have because teachers shape the future. Lily looked confused, like she was hearing something that didn't match what she'd been told at home. She pushed her fork around on her plate and asked if teachers really were important. My father said absolutely, that her daddy made a difference in students' lives every day, and that was worth more than any amount of money. She nodded slowly, but I could see her trying to work out how both things could be true at the same time. Monday morning, I went to Raymond's office with my father's check and signed the retainer agreement. Raymond said he'd start preparing the separation papers immediately, along with a motion for temporary custody. He explained we'd be requesting a full custody evaluation, which would take several months to complete. The court would likely appoint someone called a guardian ad litem to represent Lily's interests separate from what either parent wanted. This person would interview both of us, talk to Lily's teachers and counselor, observe us with Lily, and make recommendations to the judge about what custody arrangement would be healthiest for her. Raymond said the process would be long and expensive, but documenting Rebecca's behavior now was the most important thing we could do. Every conversation, every incident, every concerning thing Lily said needed to be written down with dates and times. He'd already started drafting the motion, and he showed me the section where he outlined the parental alienation concerns. Seeing it written out in legal language made it feel more real and more serious. He said we had a strong case based on what I'd shown him, but family court was unpredictable, and Rebecca would fight hard to keep primary custody. The process server delivered the separation papers to Rebecca on Wednesday afternoon while I was at work. She called me 17 times before I could get to my phone during my planning period. When I finally answered, she was screaming, so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called me vindictive and cruel and said I was trying to steal Lily from her. She said she'd never forgive me for this and that I'd regret destroying our family. I tried to stay calm and told her this was about protecting Lily from the harmful things she'd been teaching her. Rebecca said I was overreacting to normal parenting and that I was the one damaging Lily by turning her against her mother. She hung up on me and immediately called her sister Natasha. I'd always gotten along well with Natasha, and I knew Rebecca would tell her a completely different version of what was happening. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Natasha called me sounding confused and upset. She said Rebecca had told her I was abandoning the family and trying to take Lily away for no reason. I took a deep breath and explained what had really been happening over the past few months. I told her about the charts tracking my value based on payday, about sleeping in the garage, about Rebecca taking Lily's birthday money, about the replacement daddy list, about teaching Lily that I was worthless because of my salary. I told her about the concerning comments Lily had been making at the school and how the teachers and counselor were worried about her. Natasha was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then she said she'd noticed Rebecca getting more extreme lately, but she'd thought it was just stress about money. She said Rebecca had been sending her videos and articles from some online influencer who talked about women never settling for men who made less than 6 figures. Natasha had thought it was just venting, the way people sometimes share extreme content online without really meaning it. But now she was realizing Rebecca had been taking this stuff seriously and actually implementing it as a life philosophy. She said she'd seen changes in how Rebecca talked about me and about relationships in general. Everything had become transactional, about what people could provide financially. Natasha promised to stay neutral in the divorce because Rebecca was still her sister, but she asked me to keep her updated about Lily. She said if things really were as bad as I was describing, then Lily needed protection, and she'd support whatever was best for her niece. The court scheduled a temporary custody hearing for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Rebecca launched a full campaign to turn our mutual friends against me. She posted vague things on social media about betrayal and financial abuse. She called friends we'd known for years and told them I was hiding my paycheck and trying to leave her with nothing. She made herself look like the victim of a controlling husband who wanted to abandon his family. Some people reached out to me to hear my side, but others just believed Rebecca's version without asking questions. I lost several friendships during those weeks, people who'd been at our wedding and had watched Lily grow up. It hurt, but I also realized these people had never really known what was happening behind closed doors. They'd seen the version of us that we showed at parties and gatherings, not the reality of Rebecca tracking my worth on charts and exiling me to the garage. The friends who really mattered, like Theo and a few others from work, stood by me once they understood what was actually going on. Rebecca started buying Lily expensive toys and clothes with money that seemed to come from nowhere. Maybe she'd maxed out credit cards, or maybe her parents were giving her cash. Lily came home from Rebecca's time with new dolls and games and outfits that cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Rebecca was telling Lily that Daddy was trying to take her away and that they needed to stick together. She was love-bombing her with gifts and attention, while also poisoning her against me. I could see the effect during my limited time with Lily. She became anxious and clingy when Rebecca dropped her off, always asking when she could go back to Mommy's house. She was distant with me, not making eye contact, giving one-word answers to my questions. The alienation was happening right in front of me in real time, and I felt powerless to stop it without the court's help. Raymond said this was common in custody battles, that the parent losing control would often try to win the child's loyalty through gifts and manipulation. He said to document everything, but not to try to compete with Rebecca's spending because that would just make things worse. The temporary custody hearing finally arrived, and I sat in the courtroom with Raymond while we waited for the judge. Rebecca was there with her attorney, a woman named Olivia who looked sharp and expensive. The judge came in and reviewed all the documentation I'd provided through Raymond. The charts Rebecca had made showing my value fluctuating with payday. The recordings of her comments about me being worthless. The reports from Lily's teacher and from Caitlin, the school counselor, about the concerning things Lily had been saying in class. Written statements from Theo about the changes he'd noticed in me and in how I talked about my home life. Olivia argued that I was overreacting to normal marital stress and that Rebecca was simply teaching Lily about financial responsibility. She made it sound reasonable, like Rebecca was just trying to educate our daughter about money management. But the judge looked skeptical. He asked Olivia to explain why teaching financial responsibility required making charts that called a parent worthless. He asked why teaching a child about money meant telling her that her father had no value as a person. Olivia struggled to answer those questions in a way that made sense. She kept trying to reframe it as tough love or realistic parenting, but the judge wasn't buying it. The judge granted temporary shared custody with me getting Lily on weekends and 2 weeknights. He ordered both of us to attend co-parenting classes starting immediately. He also ordered a full custody evaluation and appointed a guardian ad litem named Kira Whitley to assess what arrangement would be in Lily's best interests. Kira would have the authority to interview both of us, talk to Lily privately, speak with her teachers and counselor, and observe us in our homes. Her recommendation would carry significant weight with the court. The judge also ordered Rebecca not to make any disparaging comments about me in front of Lily. Rebecca agreed in court, nodding seriously like she understood the gravity of the order. But I knew from the look on her face that she'd find ways around it. She'd be more careful about what she said when others could hear, but she'd keep working on Lily's perception of me. Enforcement of that kind of order was nearly impossible unless someone witnessed the violations and reported them. My first weekend with Lily at my father's house felt strange and uncomfortable. She'd been told by Rebecca all week that I was the bad guy trying to take her away from her mother. She barely spoke to me during the drive from Rebecca's house to my father's place. She sat in the back seat looking out the window with her arms crossed. When we got there, she went straight to the guest room my father had set up for her and closed the door. I gave her space for a while, then knocked and asked if she wanted to help make pancakes for dinner. She opened the door slowly and said okay in a quiet voice. We made pancakes together in my father's kitchen, and gradually she started to relax. She told me about a book she was reading at the school and asked if we could watch a movie later. We watched one of her favorites on the couch, and she leaned against me during the funny parts. By bedtime, she seemed almost like herself again, the tension from earlier mostly gone. When I tucked her in that night, she looked up at me with serious eyes and asked if I was really a zero like Mommy said. My heart broke hearing her ask that question. I told her that people aren't numbers and that worth doesn't come from money. I told her I loved her more than anything in the world, and that would never change no matter what anyone said. She was quiet for a minute, then hugged me tight before rolling over to sleep. During the week when Lily was back with Rebecca, I got a call from Kira Whitley, the guardian ad litem. She introduced herself and said she wanted to schedule interviews with both me and Rebecca separately, and also with Lily on her own. She'd be talking to Lily's teachers, the school counselor, and anyone else who spent significant time with Lily. She explained that her job was to figure out what custody arrangement would be healthiest for Lily, not what either parent wanted or thought was fair. She said she'd been appointed by the court specifically to represent Lily's interests, independent of both of us. Her tone was professional but warm, and she made it clear she'd be thorough in her evaluation. She'd observe me with Lily during my parenting time, and do the same with Rebecca. She'd review all the documentation that had been submitted to the court. She'd talk to my father since Lily was staying at his house during my weekends. The process would take several weeks at minimum, and she'd submit a detailed report to the judge with her recommendations. I thanked her and said I'd cooperate fully with whatever she needed. She scheduled my interview for the following Tuesday afternoon at her office downtown. I showed up at Kira's office on Tuesday afternoon with a folder full of documentation. The building was downtown in one of those old converted houses with a waiting room that had soft chairs and magazines nobody read. She came out to get me herself instead of having a receptionist call my name. She was probably in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled back and glasses that made her look serious but not cold. We went into her office, which had a desk and some chairs and shelves full of books about child psychology and family systems. She gestured for me to sit and pulled out a notepad. She started by asking me to tell her about my relationship with Lily from the beginning. I talked about when Lily was born and how I'd always been involved in her care. I changed diapers and did night feedings and took her to the park when she was little. I helped with homework every night when she started school. I went to every parent-teacher conference and school event. I coached her soccer team last year, even though I didn't know much about soccer. Kira wrote things down and asked follow-up questions about specific memories. She wanted to know what our typical day looked like when we were together. I described making breakfast on weekends and reading books before bed and helping her practice spelling words. She asked about my parenting philosophy, and I told her I believed kids needed consistency and love and to know they were valued for who they were, not what they could do or provide. She made a note of that. Then she asked about the financial situation, and I walked her through Rebecca's failing jewelry business and my teaching salary, and how Rebecca had started treating money as the measure of a person's worth. I showed her photos of the charts Rebecca had made, the one tracking my value based on payday with smiley and frowny faces, the one listing replacement daddy candidates with income estimates. Kira studied them for a long time without saying anything. Her face stayed neutral, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. She asked how long this had been going on, and I explained it had gotten worse over the past 6 months, but really accelerated in the last 2 months when Rebecca moved me to the garage. She asked what I thought was happening with Rebecca, and I told her about the online influencer content and how Rebecca seemed to be following some kind of ideology about women not respecting men who made under 6 figures. Kira asked if I'd noticed changes in Lily's behavior or emotional state. I told her about Lily calling me a liability and asking if I was really a zero. I described how Lily had started parroting Rebecca's language about value and worth. I explained that my main concern wasn't the garage or the disrespect toward me, but the psychological damage being done to Lily. Teaching an 8-year-old that people only have value based on their income was going to mess up how she saw relationships and herself. Kira nodded and wrote more notes. She asked about Rebecca's relationship with Lily, and I tried to be fair. Rebecca loved Lily in her own way, but she was using Lily as an audience for her toxic beliefs. She was teaching Lily lessons that would hurt her in the long run. The interview lasted 2 full hours. Kira asked about my work schedule and my father's house where Lily stayed during my weekends and what kind of support system I had. She asked if I'd ever been violent or threatening toward Rebecca or Lily. She asked about drug use and alcohol and mental health history. She was thorough and professional, and I answered everything honestly. When we finished, she thanked me for my time and said she'd be in touch after she completed all her interviews and observations. Her expression stayed neutral the whole time, and I had no idea what she was thinking about any of it. Rebecca's interview with Kira happened 3 days later, and apparently it did not go well. Natasha called me that evening sounding worried. She said Rebecca had spent an hour on the phone ranting about how the guardian ad litem was biased and didn't understand modern parenting. Rebecca told Natasha that Kira kept asking judgmental questions about the charts and acting like teaching Lily about financial responsibility was abuse. According to Natasha, Rebecca had brought the actual charts to the interview and showed them to Kira while explaining her value system in detail. She'd talked about how men needed to earn respect through providing, and how she was teaching Lily not to settle for poverty-level partners. She'd apparently said that the problem with society was that women had been brainwashed into thinking love mattered more than financial security. Natasha said Rebecca seemed genuinely confused about why Kira wasn't agreeing with her. She'd expected Kira to understand that she was being a responsible parent by teaching Lily these lessons early. Instead, Kira had asked a lot of questions about Lily's emotional well-being and whether Rebecca had noticed any anxiety or distress in her. Rebecca told Natasha that of course Lily wasn't distressed, she was learning valuable life skills. Natasha asked me if Rebecca had always been like this, and I told her no. 6 months ago, Rebecca was stressed about money, but she wasn't treating me like I was worthless or teaching Lily that people were disposable. Something had shifted when she found that influencer online and started consuming all that content about high-value men and financial hierarchies. Natasha went quiet for a minute, then said she'd noticed Rebecca sending her more and more extreme videos and articles lately. She'd thought Rebecca was just venting frustration, but now she was starting to realize her sister had actually adopted this stuff as a belief system. She said she was getting concerned about Rebecca's judgment and asked if there was anything she could do to help. I told her just being aware of what was really happening was helpful. Most people only heard Rebecca's version where I was the bad guy trying to abandon the family. The following week, Kira interviewed Lily at her school with Caitlin present. I didn't find out about it until afterward when Caitlin called me from her office. She said Lily had seemed confused and distressed during the whole interview. Kira had asked Lily questions about both parents and what she liked about spending time with each of us. When talking about me, Lily had been able to list specific activities. She'd mentioned making pancakes and reading books and going to the park and doing homework together. But when Kira asked what she liked about time with Rebecca, Lily had talked mostly about toys and gifts she'd received. She'd mentioned a new tablet and some expensive clothes and how Mommy said they could get a pool if they found a better daddy. Caitlin said Lily's answers had sounded coached at first. She'd repeated phrases about Daddy being a liability and not providing properly. But then when Kira asked follow-up questions, Lily had contradicted herself. She'd said she missed playing games with Daddy and that she didn't like sleeping at Mommy's house as much because Mommy was always on her phone looking at business stuff. Kira had asked Lily about the charts at home, and Lily had described them in detail. The one tracking my value based on payday, the one with replacement daddy candidates. When Kira asked how the charts made Lily feel, Lily had gotten quiet and said she didn't know. Then after a long pause, she'd said sometimes the charts made her feel bad, but Mommy said they were important for learning. Caitlin said Lily had started crying toward the end of the interview when Kira asked if she felt safe and loved at both houses. Lily had said yes, but she seemed uncertain about it. She'd asked Caitlin if she was in trouble for saying the wrong things. Caitlin told me the whole interview had been painful to watch because it was clear Lily was caught between conflicting messages and didn't know which version of reality was true. The custody evaluation process dragged on for 6 weeks after that. Kira needed time to complete all her interviews and observations and write her full report. During those weeks, I focused on being consistent and present for Lily during my parenting time. Every other weekend and 2 weeknights, she came to stay at my father's house with me. We established routines that helped her feel secure. Homework at the kitchen table right after school on my weeknight visits. I'd sit with her and help with math problems or spelling words, and we'd talk about her day. Reading before bed every night she stayed over. She got to pick the books, and we'd curl up on the couch in the guest room and read 2 or 3 chapters. Weekend trips to the park or the library, or sometimes just walking around the neighborhood. We'd get ice cream on Sunday afternoons before I drove her back to Rebecca's house. The routines seemed to help Lily relax. The first few visits she'd been tense and quiet, watching me like she was waiting for me to do something wrong. But gradually she started acting more like herself. She'd laugh at jokes and tell me stories about school and ask questions about random things like why the sky was blue or how birds knew where to fly. The coached responses started to fade. She stopped calling me a liability or asking about my paycheck. One night, about 4 weeks into the evaluation process, we were reading before bed, and she put the book down and looked at me. She said she didn't like the charts at Mommy's house because they made her feel bad. I asked her what she meant, and she said the charts made her worry about whether Daddy was good or bad, depending on what day it was. She said it was confusing because at Mommy's house Daddy was bad most days, but when she was with me Daddy seemed good all the time. I told her that people weren't good or bad based on money, and that I loved her every single day no matter what. She nodded and picked the book back up, and we kept reading, but I could tell something had shifted in how she was processing everything. During this same period, Rebecca violated the judge's order by making more disparaging comments about me to Lily. I didn't know about it right away, but Lily reported it to Kira during a follow-up interview. Kira called me afterward to let me know she'd documented the violation in her notes. Apparently, Rebecca had told Lily that I was trying to steal her away and that I didn't really love her as much as Mommy did. She'd said I was just trying to avoid paying child support by getting custody. She'd shown Lily calculations of how much money I'd save if I didn't have to pay Rebecca anything. Lily had repeated all of this to Kira and seemed upset about it. Kira said this was significant because it showed Rebecca wasn't following the court's clear instruction to stop making negative comments about me in front of Lily. I called Raymond to tell him about the violation, and he said this stuff mattered a lot. It demonstrated that Rebecca was unwilling to follow court orders and prioritized Lily's well-being over her own agenda. Judges took violations of their orders seriously, especially in custody cases. Every time Rebecca did something like this, it strengthened our case that she wasn't capable of co-parenting appropriately. Raymond said to keep documenting everything and that Kira would include all of this in her evaluation report. 6 weeks after the interview started, Kira completed her full custody evaluation report and filed it with the court. Raymond got a copy and called me the same day to discuss it before the hearing. He sounded pleased with the content. Kira's recommendation was for me to have primary physical custody of Lily, with Rebecca getting supervised visitation until she completed parenting classes and therapy addressing her harmful beliefs about value and worth. The report was detailed and thorough. It cited concerns about psychological abuse and parental alienation. It described the charts and the toxic messages Rebecca was teaching Lily about people's worth being tied to income. It noted the violations of the judge's order about disparaging comments. It included observations from Lily's teacher and Caitlin about changes in Lily's behavior and emotional state. It discussed Lily's confusion and distress during interviews and her coached responses that she couldn't maintain under questioning. Kira had written that while Rebecca clearly loved Lily, she was causing psychological harm through her belief system and her inability to separate her anger at me from her parenting of Lily. The report recommended supervised visitation, because Rebecca needed to demonstrate she could interact with Lily without making negative comments about me or teaching harmful messages about human worth. It recommended parenting classes focused on child development and age-appropriate discussions of money. It recommended therapy for Rebecca to address the underlying beliefs driving her behavior. Raymond said this was about as strong a recommendation as we could hope for. Guardian ad litem reports carried significant weight with judges because they were supposed to be neutral advocates for the child's best interests. If the judge followed Kira's recommendation, we'd be in a good position. Rebecca was furious when she read the evaluation. She fired her attorney within days and hired a more aggressive one who promised to fight the recommendation hard. The new attorney was a woman named Sandra Voss, who had a reputation for taking difficult cases and fighting dirty. Sandra immediately filed motions challenging Kira's credentials and the validity of the evaluation. She argued that Kira was biased against Rebecca from the start and that the evaluation process was flawed. She claimed Rebecca's parenting methods were simply about teaching financial literacy, and that Kira had misinterpreted normal parenting as abuse. She requested that the court throw out the evaluation and appoint a new guardian ad litem. The motions delayed the final custody hearing by another month, while the judge reviewed the challenges. This meant more legal work for Raymond and higher costs for me. My father had already spent the $5,000 he'd given me for the retainer, and now we needed more money for the additional work. He didn't hesitate. He took out a small loan against his house to cover the fees. He said Lily was worth it, and he wasn't going to let money be the reason we couldn't protect her. I felt awful about him going into debt for my legal battle, but he insisted. He said this was what family did for each other, and that he'd never forgive himself if we lost custody because we couldn't afford to fight properly. During the delay while the court reviewed Sandra's motions, Rebecca's behavior became more erratic and concerning. One Saturday afternoon, she showed up at my father's house during my parenting time, demanding to see Lily outside the custody schedule. I was in the backyard with Lily helping her practice riding her bike without training wheels when my father came out and said Rebecca was at the front door. I told Lily to stay in the backyard and went to deal with it. Rebecca was standing on the porch looking agitated. She said she needed to see Lily right now because she missed her. I explained calmly that this was my parenting time according to the court order, and she couldn't just show up unannounced. She started yelling that I was keeping Lily from her and that she had a right to see her daughter. I refused to let her disrupt Lily's routine and told her she needed to leave. She pulled out her phone and called the police, claiming I was keeping Lily from her illegally. 2 officers showed up 20 minutes later, and I showed them the custody order. They read through it and told Rebecca she was actually violating the order by showing up during my designated parenting time without permission. They explained that she couldn't demand access outside the schedule and that showing up like this could be considered harassment. Rebecca argued with them, but they were clear that she needed to leave. After she drove away, one of the officers gave me his card and said to call if she showed up again. He said they'd document this incident in their report and that I should tell my attorney about it. The whole thing had taken over an hour, and Lily had heard the yelling from the backyard. She was upset and asked why Mommy was mad. I tried to explain that Mommy missed her, but that we had rules about when she stayed with each parent. Lily seemed to accept this, but she was quieter than usual for the rest of the day. The incident at my father's house was apparently the final straw for Natasha. She'd been watching Rebecca's behavior get worse and worse, and she finally confronted her sister about it. Natasha called me 2 days later and said they'd had a major falling out. She'd told Rebecca that her behavior was out of control and that she was hurting Lily with all of this. Rebecca had responded by accusing Natasha of taking my side and betraying their family. She'd said Natasha didn't understand what it was like to be married to someone who refused to provide properly. Natasha had pointed out that I was providing, just not at the income level Rebecca wanted, and that treating people as disposable based on money was toxic. Rebecca had hung up on her. Natasha told me she'd decided she was willing to testify at the custody hearing about the concerning changes she'd witnessed in Rebecca's thinking and behavior. She said she felt guilty for not speaking up sooner when she first noticed Rebecca getting extreme with the online content. She'd thought it was just venting, but now she realized it had become a dangerous belief system. She wanted to help protect Lily even if it meant testifying against her own sister. I thanked her and said it meant a lot that she was willing to do that. Raymond was pleased when I told him. Having Rebecca's own sister testify about her concerning behavior would be powerful evidence. The judge denied Sandra's motions to throw out the evaluation and appointed a new guardian ad litem. He found that Kira's credentials were solid and that her evaluation process had been appropriate and thorough. This cleared the way for the final custody hearing to be scheduled. The court set a date 6 weeks out, which gave both sides time to prepare their cases. Sandra told Rebecca's friends that she planned to argue I was alienating Lily from her mother and that the evaluation was biased against Rebecca's parenting philosophy. She was going to present Rebecca as a mother who was simply trying to teach her daughter important life lessons about financial responsibility. Raymond prepared to present the extensive documentation of Rebecca's harmful behavior. He had the charts and the recordings and the school reports from Lily's teacher and Caitlin. He had Natasha's testimony about the online content and the changes in Rebecca's thinking. He had Kira's detailed evaluation findings about the psychological damage being done to Lily. He had documentation of Rebecca's violations of court orders and her erratic behavior, like showing up at my father's house. He felt confident we had a strong case, but he warned me that custody trials were unpredictable. Judges had wide discretion, and sometimes they made decisions that didn't align with the evidence. I tried not to think about what would happen if we lost. I focused on spending time with Lily and being the stable, consistent presence she needed while everything else was chaos. The custody hearing started at 9 in the morning, and I knew from the moment we walked into the courtroom that it was going to be a long day. Rebecca sat at the table with Sandra looking confident, like she thought this was just another opportunity to explain her philosophy to people who didn't understand it yet. Raymond had prepared me for what was coming, but sitting there watching the judge take his seat and the bailiff call the court to order made everything feel too real. Sandra called Rebecca as her first witness, and Rebecca walked to the stand like she was going to a business presentation instead of a custody hearing about our daughter. She swore to tell the truth, and sat down smoothing her skirt and looking directly at the judge with a smile that was supposed to seem friendly, but came across as fake. Sandra started with easy questions about Rebecca's relationship with Lily and her involvement in Lily's education and activities. Rebecca talked about helping with homework and taking Lily to dance class and how much she loved being a mother. She made it sound like she was parent of the year, and I watched the judge taking notes with an expression that didn't give anything away. Then Sandra moved into the harder questions about the charts and the comments about my income, and Rebecca didn't hesitate at all. She explained that she was teaching Lily important life lessons about financial responsibility and that children need to understand the value of money and hard work. When Sandra asked about calling me a zero and worthless, Rebecca actually smiled like the question was silly. She said she was using math concepts to teach Lily about value, and that zero was just a number, not a personal attack. She explained that she wanted Lily to understand that people's contributions have different worth, and that it's important to recognize who provides and who doesn't. The judge's expression changed slightly, and I saw him write something down with more force than before. Sandra asked if Rebecca thought it was appropriate to tie a parent's worth to their paycheck, and Rebecca said absolutely because that's how the real world works. She talked about teaching Lily to be smart about relationships and not settle for less than she deserves. She mentioned the online content she'd been following and presented it as educational material about financial literacy and self-worth. When Sandra asked about the garage situation, Rebecca explained that she'd been trying to motivate me to improve our financial situation and that sometimes tough love is necessary. The judge interrupted and asked Rebecca directly if she understood that calling a parent worthless in front of a child could be psychologically harmful. Rebecca looked surprised by the question and said she didn't call me worthless as a person, just as a financial provider. She insisted there was a difference and that Lily understood the distinction. The judge asked how an 8-year-old was supposed to understand that distinction, and Rebecca said children are smarter than people give them credit for. Raymond cross-examined Rebecca, and that's when things started to fall apart for her. He asked her to explain the replacement daddy chart, and Rebecca defended it as exploring options for Lily's future. He asked about taking Lily's birthday money, and Rebecca said it was a family investment. He asked about the 6-month ultimatum, and Rebecca said it was motivation, not a threat. Every answer she gave made her sound worse, and I could see the judge's expression getting more concerned. Raymond showed the judge photos of the charts with the smiley and frowny faces tied to my pay periods, and asked Rebecca if she thought this was appropriate to display in a child's home. Rebecca said it was a visual teaching tool, and that Lily needed to learn about consequences. Raymond asked what consequences an 8-year-old should face for her father's salary, and Rebecca said Lily needed to understand reality. The judge interrupted again and asked Rebecca if she had considered the impact on Lily's relationship with me. Rebecca said Lily's relationship with me was fine, and that I was the one creating problems by being too sensitive about financial discussions. Raymond asked about the comment about upgrading to a better daddy, and Rebecca actually said that she'd been explaining to Lily about opportunity costs. The judge put his pen down and looked at Rebecca for a long moment before telling her she could step down. I could tell from his face that her testimony hadn't gone the way Sandra had hoped. When Raymond called me to testify, I felt my stomach turn, but I made myself walk to the stand and swear to tell the truth. Raymond started by asking me about my relationship with Lily, and I explained that we'd always been close until the past few months when Rebecca's behavior had created distance between us. I talked about helping Lily with homework and reading to her at bedtime and taking her to the park on weekends. I explained that I'd noticed changes in Lily starting around 6 months ago when she began making comments about my worth and my value. Raymond asked me to describe the charts, and I went through each one in detail explaining how Rebecca had created a system to track my value based on payday and how she'd made a list of replacement candidates with their estimated incomes. I talked about sleeping in the garage for 2 months in February and how Lily had asked why Daddy didn't get to sleep inside anymore. I explained that Rebecca had told Lily I didn't deserve bedroom privileges because I didn't provide properly. Raymond asked about the birthday money, and I explained that Rebecca had taken $150 from Lily's piggy bank that Lily's grandparents had given her and used it to buy inventory for her failing jewelry business. I talked about how Rebecca had told Lily that money sitting idle was wasted and that only stupid people saved instead of spending. The judge asked me how this had affected Lily, and I explained that she'd become anxious and confused about whether I had value as a person. I described the coached responses and how Lily would repeat things Rebecca had taught her about men and money and worth. I explained that Lily had started calling me a liability and asking if we were going to get a better daddy soon. I told the judge about the incident at the school where Lily had told her class that teachers don't deserve respect because they don't make enough money. Raymond asked what I wanted from the custody arrangement, and I explained that I wasn't trying to remove Rebecca from Lily's life, but that I needed to protect Lily from messages that were damaging her psychological development. I said Lily needed to understand that people have inherent worth that isn't based on their bank accounts, and that both her parents love her regardless of income levels. Sandra cross-examined me and tried to make it seem like I was overreacting to normal parenting differences. She asked if I'd ever made mistakes as a parent, and I said of course I had. She asked if I thought Rebecca was a bad mother, and I said no, but that her current behavior was harmful to Lily. She asked if I was trying to punish Rebecca for wanting me to earn more money, and I said I was trying to protect our daughter from being taught that her father was disposable. The judge asked me directly if I thought supervised visitation was necessary, and I explained that I was concerned Rebecca wouldn't be able to stop making comments about money and worth, even if ordered to do so. I said I hoped Rebecca could work with a therapist to understand the harm she was causing and that eventually we could co-parent effectively, but that right now, Lily needed protection from the toxic messages. When I stepped down, I felt exhausted, but also relieved that I'd been able to explain everything clearly. Natasha testified next, and I could see Rebecca's face go red when her own sister took the stand. Natasha explained that she'd known both of us for years, and that she'd watched Rebecca's behavior become increasingly extreme over the past 6 months. She described conversations where Rebecca had talked about upgrading to a wealthier husband and treating me as a temporary placeholder until someone better came along. She explained that Rebecca had been sending her videos and articles from an online influencer who preached that women should never respect men making under 6 figures. Natasha said she'd thought at first that Rebecca was just venting about financial stress, but that she'd realized over time that Rebecca had adopted this as a life philosophy. She described Rebecca's jewelry business and how it had lost money consistently for 3 years, while Rebecca insisted it had potential. She explained that Rebecca had become obsessed with income levels and had started evaluating everyone in her life based on their earning capacity. Sandra tried to discredit Natasha by suggesting she was biased in my favor, but Natasha pointed out that Rebecca was her sister and that testifying against her own family wasn't something she'd do lightly. She said she was here because she was worried about Lily and because she felt guilty for not speaking up sooner when she'd first noticed the concerning changes in Rebecca's thinking. Natasha described a conversation where Rebecca had shown her the replacement daddy chart and talked about how much better Lily's life would be with a father who made $200,000 a year instead of $43,000. She said Rebecca had been completely serious and hadn't seemed to understand why Natasha found this disturbing. The judge asked Natasha if she thought Rebecca understood the impact of her behavior on Lily, and Natasha said honestly she didn't think Rebecca did. She explained that Rebecca seemed to genuinely believe she was teaching Lily important lessons and preparing her for the real world. Natasha said Rebecca had become so absorbed in the online content and the ideology that she'd lost perspective on what was appropriate to say to a child. When Natasha stepped down, Rebecca wouldn't look at her, and I knew their relationship was probably damaged permanently, but Natasha had done the right thing by telling the truth. Kira took the stand last, and her testimony was the most detailed. She explained her credentials and her experience with custody evaluations and parental alienation cases. She walked through her evaluation process and how she'd interviewed both parents and Lily and various people in Lily's life. She explained that Lily showed signs of psychological distress related to the conflicting messages she was receiving about my worth as a person. She described how Lily's responses during the initial interview had sounded coached and how Lily had contradicted herself when asked follow-up questions. Kira explained that children Lily's age are concrete thinkers and that teaching them that a parent's worth is tied to income creates genuine confusion about whether that parent has value at all. She described how Lily had become anxious about money and had started evaluating people based on what they could provide materially. Kira said this was developmentally inappropriate and potentially damaging to Lily's ability to form healthy relationships in the future. She explained that Lily was being put in the middle of adult conflicts and being asked to choose sides based on financial criteria she didn't fully understand. Sandra tried to challenge Kira's findings by suggesting that teaching children about financial responsibility was normal parenting. Kira responded that there's a difference between teaching money management skills and teaching children that people are disposable based on their income. She explained that Rebecca's approach wasn't about financial literacy, but about assigning human worth based on earning capacity. The judge asked Kira about her recommendation for supervised visitation, and she explained that she was concerned Rebecca would continue making inappropriate comments about my income, even if ordered not to. She said Rebecca had demonstrated during the evaluation that she didn't fully grasp why her behavior was problematic, and that supervision would be necessary until Rebecca completed therapy addressing these beliefs. Kira stood by her recommendation for me to have primary custody and said it was in Lily's best interest to have a stable environment where she wasn't receiving toxic messages about her father's worth. When Kira finished testifying, the judge thanked her and said he'd take everything under advisement. He announced he'd issue a ruling within a week and dismissed everyone. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt drained, but hopeful that the judge had seen the truth about what was happening. The week waiting for the ruling was torture. I tried to focus on my teaching and on spending time with Lily during my parenting time, but I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if the judge ruled against me. Raymond called me 3 days after the hearing to say he felt good about how things had gone and that the judge's reactions during Rebecca's testimony suggested he understood the severity of the situation. On day 6, Raymond called again to say the ruling had been filed and that we'd won. I'm granted primary physical custody with Rebecca getting supervised visitation every other weekend and 1 evening per week. Rebecca is ordered to complete a parenting course focused on co-parenting and to attend therapy addressing her harmful beliefs about worth and value. The judge's written order specifically prohibits Rebecca from making any comments about my income or worth in Lily's presence and from displaying charts or materials that assign value to people based on money. Raymond read me sections of the order, and the judge had been clear that Rebecca's behavior constituted psychological abuse and that Lily needed protection from these messages while Rebecca worked on changing her thinking. I felt relief wash over me, but also awareness that this was just the beginning. Rebecca would appeal and fight and make this as difficult as possible, but at least Lily would be safe with me while that process played out. Rebecca called me screaming within an hour of getting the ruling. She said I'd stolen her daughter and ruined her life, and that she'd appeal and fight until she got Lily back. I stayed calm and told her the judge had made his decision based on what was best for Lily, not what either of us wanted. She hung up on me and called Sandra, who apparently told her that appeals rarely succeed in custody cases unless there was a clear legal error. The appeal process would take months, but in the meantime, the custody order stood, and Rebecca had to follow it or face contempt charges. Sandra filed the appeal paperwork, but told Rebecca privately that her chances weren't good according to Natasha, who Rebecca had called crying. Rebecca was devastated and angry, and blamed everyone except herself. She posted on social media about corrupt judges and biased evaluations until Sandra told her to take it down because it could be used against her in the appeal. I blocked Rebecca's social media and focused on what came next, which was moving with Lily into our own place and starting the process of helping her heal. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from Lily's school that I could afford on my teaching salary. It wasn't fancy, but it had good light and a small yard, and it was ours. I signed the lease and spent a weekend moving my things from my father's house with Theo's help. Lily came with me to see the apartment before we moved in, and I let her choose which bedroom she wanted. She picked the one with the window facing the yard and asked if she could paint it. I said absolutely, and we went to the hardware store together to pick out colors. She chose bright yellow for one wall and light blue for the others because she said it reminded her of sunshine and sky. We spent a Saturday painting together, and she got more paint on herself than on the walls, but she laughed the whole time. I hung up pictures she drew of our family, and she included Rebecca in every single one because despite everything, Lily still loved her mother. I encouraged this because I didn't want to alienate Lily from Rebecca, the way Rebecca had tried to alienate her from me. I wanted Lily to have a relationship with both parents and to understand that the custody arrangement was about keeping her safe, not about punishing Rebecca. Lily decorated her room with stuffed animals and books and drawings, and when we finished, she stood in the doorway looking proud. She asked if this was really ours, and I said yes, this is our home. She hugged me and said she liked having her own room that didn't have charts on the walls. Lily started therapy with Kira the week after we moved into the apartment. The sessions were once a week after school and focused on helping Lily process the confusing messages she'd received about worth and value. Kira used age-appropriate techniques like play therapy and art projects to help Lily understand that people have inherent worth that isn't based on money. She had Lily draw pictures of things she valued, and Lily drew family and friends and her stuffed animals and her favorite books. Kira asked if any of those things had price tags, and Lily said no. Kira explained that the most important things in life don't have prices, and that people are the same way. Progress was slow because Lily had spent months absorbing Rebecca's messages, and undoing that damage took time. Some sessions, Lily would say something that sounded like Rebecca talking, and Kira would gently challenge it. Other sessions, Lily would express confusion about whether I was valuable or not, and Kira would help her work through those feelings. After a few months, Lily started to internalize healthier concepts about relationships and family. She stopped talking about people in terms of what they could provide, and started talking about them in terms of what they were like as people. Kira told me the therapy was working, but that Lily would need continued support for a while longer. Rebecca's supervised visitations started 2 weeks after the custody order. The visits happened at a family center with a trained supervisor present to monitor interactions. The first few visits were rough because Rebecca struggled to interact with Lily without making comments about money or trying to buy Lily's affection with expensive gifts. She'd show up with bags of toys and clothes, and the supervisor would have to explain that the visits were about spending quality time, not about gifts. Rebecca would get frustrated and defensive, saying she just wanted to give Lily nice things. The supervisor redirected her multiple times during each visit, reminding her that the court order prohibited comments about income or worth. Rebecca would comply for a while, but then slip back into old patterns. Lily seemed confused by the supervised setting and asked why someone had to watch Mommy. I explained that the supervisor was there to help Mommy learn better ways to spend time together and that it was temporary. After the first month of difficult visits, Rebecca's therapist apparently helped her understand that she was pushing Lily away with her behavior. The supervisor's report started noting small improvements in how Rebecca engaged during visits. She started suggesting activities instead of just giving gifts. She'd bring craft supplies or board games and actually play with Lily instead of just sitting there. The comments about money decreased, though they didn't stop completely. Rebecca still had moments where she'd make comparisons or mention things Lily could have if circumstances were different. The supervisor would intervene immediately, and Rebecca would apologize and change the subject. It was progress, even if it was slow and imperfect. At the school, Lily's teacher started noticing positive changes. Lily stopped making concerning comments about people's worth and started participating more in class discussions. She seemed less anxious and more engaged with her schoolwork and her friendships. The teacher called me for a progress check and said Lily appeared more settled and happy than she'd been in months. Caitlin checked in with me regularly too, and noted that Lily seemed to have a stable home environment now with consistent routines. She said the change in Lily was noticeable to everyone who worked with her. Lily's grades improved, and she joined an after-school art club that she loved. She made friends with other kids in the apartment building, and they'd play in the yard after school. I watched her becoming more like herself again, instead of the anxious, confused child she'd been during the worst of Rebecca's behavior. It felt like we were finally moving forward instead of just surviving. 3 months passed with Rebecca showing up every Saturday at the supervised visitation center. The supervisor's weekly report started noting real changes in how Rebecca acted during the visits. She brought craft supplies instead of shopping bags full of expensive toys. She played board games with Lily, instead of just sitting there talking about all the things they could buy someday. The comments about money didn't stop completely, but they happened less and less. When Rebecca slipped up and mentioned something about what Lily could have with more money, the supervisor would step in right away, and Rebecca would apologize and change topics. Her therapist sent a progress report to the court, saying Rebecca was starting to understand how her behavior had hurt Lily. The supervised visitation supervisor wrote that Rebecca's interactions with Lily were improving, and that she was following the court's rules most of the time. Raymond called me one afternoon and said we might be able to move to unsupervised visits soon if Rebecca kept making progress. Raymond set up a meeting through Rebecca's attorney to discuss unsupervised visitation. I sat in Raymond's office while he talked to Rebecca's lawyer on speakerphone. I made it clear through Raymond that unsupervised visits would only happen if Rebecca kept going to therapy, and if she made zero comments about money or worth or value when Lily was around. Rebecca's attorney said Rebecca agreed to those terms and would sign a written agreement. Then her attorney said Rebecca wanted to apologize for the damage she caused. The apology came through the lawyer in formal language that sounded rehearsed. I wasn't sure if Rebecca really understood what she'd done to Lily, or if she was just saying what she needed to say to get more time with our daughter. Raymond drafted an agreement that spelled out all the rules, and both Rebecca and I signed it. The first unsupervised visit happened on a Saturday morning at Riverside Park. I drove Lily there and saw Rebecca waiting by the playground. Lily grabbed my hand tight when she saw her mother. I walked Lily over to Rebecca and told them I'd be back in 2 hours. Lily looked nervous and kept glancing back at me as I walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes making sure everything seemed okay before I drove away. Those 2 hours felt long. I kept checking my phone to see if Rebecca would text something that broke the agreement or if the visit would fall apart somehow. When I came back to pick Lily up, she was on the swings and Rebecca was pushing her. Lily ran over to me smiling and told me they'd had fun. They'd played on the playground and fed the ducks, and Rebecca had packed sandwiches for lunch. No mention of gifts or money or anything that would have worried me. It was a small step, but it mattered. Over the next few months, we slowly increased Rebecca's parenting time. She started having Lily every other weekend without supervision. The transitions on Sunday evenings usually went smooth. Lily would come back to the apartment and tell me about her weekend without the anxiety she used to show. She talked about both houses in a normal way like kids do when they have two homes. She stopped making comparisons between what each parent could afford. One Sunday evening, Lily mentioned that Rebecca's apartment was smaller than she remembered, and I realized Rebecca must have moved somewhere more affordable. Lily didn't seem bothered by it. She just talked about how she and Rebecca had rearranged her room at Rebecca's place and picked out new sheets together. Rebecca's jewelry business finally shut down after 3 years of losing money. Natasha called me to tell me about it before Lily mentioned anything. Rebecca had gotten a regular job as a sales associate at Nordstrom, which gave her steady paychecks and health insurance. Natasha said having a normal job seemed to ground Rebecca in reality more than the business fantasy ever did. The next time Lily came back from a weekend with Rebecca, she talked about visiting her mom at work and seeing all the fancy clothes. No mention of income brackets or replacement candidates or any of that toxic stuff from before. Rebecca seemed more focused on actually spending time with Lily instead of trying to prove something about status or success. Lily kept seeing Kira for therapy every other week. I'd drop her off at Kira's office and wait in the lobby reading or checking email. One afternoon, Kira asked to talk to me after Lily's session. She said Lily was making real progress. Lily could now explain that people had worth beyond money and that both her parents loved her even though we didn't live together. She'd learned coping skills for when the anxiety came back sometimes. Kira thought we should keep doing therapy for another 6 months and then move to check-ins only when Lily needed them. Hearing that Lily understood people weren't numbers anymore made me feel like all the court battles and legal fees had been worth it. The court ordered me and Rebecca to attend a co-parenting counseling session together. We met at a therapist's office on a Tuesday evening. Rebecca sat on one end of the couch and I sat on the other end. The therapist sat between us in a chair and asked us questions about how we communicated about Lily's needs. It felt awkward and tense. Every time I spoke, Rebecca would look away or cross her arms. But we managed to talk about Lily's schedule and her school stuff and her doctor appointments without attacking each other. Near the end of the session, the therapist asked Rebecca if she understood how her previous behavior had affected Lily. Rebecca said yes, and that she'd been influenced by bad advice from online. She didn't take full responsibility for her choices, but she admitted she'd been wrong. It wasn't perfect accountability, but it was more than I'd expected from her. A year after the custody ruling, Lily turned 9 years old. We had a party at the apartment with her friends from the school and from the building. Rebecca came to the party and brought a reasonable gift instead of something expensive and over the top. She stayed for an hour and talked to the other parents in a normal way. After everyone left, Lily helped me clean up and told me it was the best birthday she'd ever had. She was doing great in the school. Her teacher sent home progress reports that showed good grades and positive comments about her participation. She had friends who came over for play dates. She seemed genuinely happy most of the time. She'd stopped asking when her mom and dad would live together again. One night when I was tucking her in, she told me she was glad I was her dad and that she didn't think people were numbers anymore. That conversation made everything worth it. Rebecca and I worked out a functional co-parenting relationship over time. We weren't friends and probably never would be, but we could text each other about Lily's schedule without it turning into a fight. We both showed up to Lily's school conferences and sat in the same room without drama. We coordinated about doctor appointments and after-school activities. Rebecca had mostly stopped trying to control everything and had accepted that we were going to parent differently in our separate homes. The important thing was that Lily wasn't caught in the middle anymore. She could love both of us without feeling like she had to choose sides or worry about making one of us mad. Natasha started coming around again to see both me and Rebecca separately. She'd take Lily out for aunt and niece time at the movies or the mall. She called me one evening and said Rebecca still had moments where she'd fall back into her old thinking patterns, but she caught herself now and had more self-awareness than before. Natasha made sure to spend regular time with Lily, giving her another stable adult in her life besides me and Rebecca. She apologized again for not stepping in sooner when she'd seen the warning signs. I told her what mattered was that she'd helped when it counted and that Lily needed her aunt in her life. The school conference happened on a Thursday evening in November. I sat in one of those small plastic chairs designed for 8-year-olds while Lily's teacher pulled up her progress reports on a laptop. She went through the grades first, showing me solid scores in every subject. Lily was reading above grade level, and her math skills had improved significantly over the past year. The teacher smiled when she talked about how Lily participated in class discussions and helped other students who were struggling with assignments. She said Lily had good friends and got along well with everyone. When I asked if there were any concerns about her emotional state or behavior, the teacher looked surprised by the question. She said Lily seemed happy and well-adjusted and talked about both her parents in positive ways. She mentioned that Lily had told the class about a science project we did together and about baking cookies at her mom's house. The teacher had no idea what we'd been through, and that was exactly how it should be. Lily had moved past the worst of it enough that the damage wasn't visible to people who hadn't witnessed the charts and the toxic lessons about worth. I thanked the teacher and walked out to the parking lot, feeling like we'd actually made it through something terrible and come out okay on the other side. I made my last payment to my father on a Saturday afternoon, 18 months after he'd first loaned me the money for legal fees. We were sitting in his living room while Lily played with his dog in the backyard. I handed him the check, and he looked at it for a long moment before folding it and putting it in his shirt pocket. He told me he was proud of how I'd handled everything even when it got hard. He said standing up for myself and for Lily was the right choice, even though it cost money we didn't have, and put me through hell for months. His support had made the custody fight possible when I couldn't have afforded it alone. He'd developed a close relationship with Lily during the whole process, and she loved coming to his house on weekends. She called him every few days just to talk about school or her friends or whatever was on her mind. He'd become one of the stable adults in her life who she could count on no matter what. Through the window, I watched Lily throw a tennis ball for the dog and heard her laughing when it brought the ball back covered in dirt. My father said that sound right there was worth every penny he'd loaned me, and he'd do it again without hesitation. 2 years after the initial custody battle, Rebecca and I had worked out a standard arrangement without any supervision requirements. The court had reviewed her progress in therapy and her consistent appropriate behavior during parenting time and agreed to remove the restrictions. Lily spent roughly equal time with both of us now, and we coordinated schedules around her activities and friendships without major conflicts. Rebecca had a steady boyfriend named Noah, who worked as an accountant and seemed like a decent person. He treated Lily well and didn't try to replace me as her father. I'd started dating someone too, a teacher named Sarah from the middle school across town who understood the demands of the job and the complications of co-parenting. She'd been through her own divorce and had a son Lily's age, so she got what it was like to balance everything. Rebecca and I could text each other about doctor appointments or school events without it turning into an argument. We both showed up to Lily's soccer games and sat on opposite sides of the field, but we were civil when we had to interact. It wasn't friendship and probably never would be, but it was functional co-parenting that put Lily's needs first. Lily turned 10 in March, and we had a party at my apartment with her friends from the school and the building. She'd grown taller and more confident over the past 2 years. Her anxiety had faded, and she seemed genuinely happy most of the time. The charts and toxic messages about worth were so far in the past that she barely mentioned them anymore. When I tucked her in at night during my parenting time, she told me about her day without any of the confusion or fear that used to cloud our conversations. She talked about her friends and her teachers and the book she was reading. She asked me questions about my day and listened to my answers like she actually cared. We'd built a strong relationship based on trust and love instead of financial metrics. She knew I would always be there for her no matter what, and that my value as her father had nothing to do with my paycheck. That understanding was worth more than any amount of money could ever be.